At the dining table, my boyfriend's friend was looking at me maliciously and making frivolous jokes. He remained indifferent throughout. But when my best friend was teased, he directly hit his friend on the head with a wine bottle. Later, even for the sake of my best friend, he left me with a leg disability in the wild countryside in a blizzard. The snow was falling heavier and heavier. When Henry was driving, suddenly the phone rang. I vaguely heard a male voice on the other end mention the name Serafina. Henry frowned, and a sense of unease welled up in my heart. Until he braked and pulled over. There are only 3 kilometers left. Luna, get out of the car and walk there by yourself. I have an urgent matter. Because of Serafina? I asked softly. It could be seen that Henry was in a hurry and his tone was a bit impatient. Can you stop making trouble? Do you know how annoying your suspicious look all day is? Get out of the car first. I have an important matter. I'm not joking with you. I originally wanted to remind him that he had forgotten about my injured ankle yesterday. With only 3 kilometers left, couldn't he send me there first? But his eyes were full of impatience. I opened my mouth, but in the end I still couldn't speak. After all, speaking up would also be asking for trouble. At that time, I still didn't understand. Because he loved her, he didn't want her to wait for even a minute. Henry stepped on the gas and turned around and left as soon as I got out of the car and closed the door. This time I didn't cry. The wind and snow were too heavy, and I still had a long way to go. But the injury on my ankle couldn't support me to walk very far. In the suburbs, with the addition of bad weather, there were also not many taxis. I walked step by step in the wild countryside covered in white snow. In fact, after only walking for more than 10 minutes, my feet hurt so much that I could hardly stand. The signal here was poor, so I managed to call Henry. It was quickly hung up. I raised my trembling hand frozen by the cold and wiped the snow off the screen. I made the second call. Finally, it was connected. Luna, how far are you going to go? Henry's indifferent voice seemed to be trying hard to endure. Henry, my feet hurt so much that I can't walk anymore. Can you come back and send me? If you can't walk, call the police. Henry finally erupted. Didn't I tell you that I have an important matter and can't come back? Can't you understand human language? As soon as he finished speaking, he hung up the phone. The hand holding the phone finally dropped powerlessly. I'm not unaware that I can call the police. But because you are the person I am closest to and trust the most, that's why I instinctively seek help from you first. Moreover, Henry had only driven out for more than 10 minutes. I thought he would come back faster. But his words, like the overwhelming snow, fell on my head in a rush. Cold and piercing, it also made me completely awake. I called the police while there was still 1 bar of signal left. I kept waiting for rescue while squatting by the side of the road. I don't know how long it had passed. When my consciousness began to blur, I vaguely heard the sound of a police car. Snow covered my body and head. I barely raised my head and looked at the monotonous and suffocating expanse of white. Before my consciousness completely disappeared, I finally realized pessimistically. I seemed to be trapped in this first snow and could never get out. Half a month ago, Serafina returned to the country and transferred to our school. Henry picked her up at the airport. And Henry is my boyfriend who I have known for 9 years and been together with for 2 years. We are childhood sweethearts. I looked at the moments posted by Serafina. At critical moments, only brothers are reliable. The picture attached was Henry pulling her suitcase and walking in front with his back. A hard-to-bear grievance welled up straight in my heart. When I returned to school from another place, Henry always used the excuse of having many experiments to picking me up. I pulled out my address book and dialed Henry's number without hesitation. It was clearly connected, but no one answered. When I called again, it was turned off. I sat through a long class in a daze, looking at my phone from time to time, but there was no movement. Until I walked out of the teaching building, Henry was standing coldly at the door in a long black coat. I pursed my lips and then walked over. Let's go. I'll take you to eat. Henry glanced at me and turned to leave. I stood where I was and grabbed his sleeve. What's the matter? He quietly pulled back his sleeve. I pulled down my thick scarf a bit to reveal my chin and looked directly at him. Henry, did you pick up Serafina? He narrowed his eyes and looked at me for a few seconds. What do you want to say? I lowered my eyes and asked softly, why did you pick her up? Testing me? He gave a short laugh, and his voice was cold. Although Henry is usually cold and taciturn, he is rarely so aggressive. It wasn't until later that I realized belatedly that his mood at that time was all because Serafina labeled him as a brother and he was unhappy. I was forced to be speechless by him and remained silent without speaking. Henry seemed to realize his excessive reaction as well. He took a step closer to me. Luna, you know I don't like being questioned. I still quietly lowered my head, trying to recall which of my words just now was a question. His tone softened. Let me take you to eat first. I was still a bit sad because Henry didn't address my question directly. Looking up, I whispered my complaint to him. You haven't come to pick me up. Enough. Henry straightened up, much taller than me. He looked down at me almost disdainfully, a hint of impatience flashing in his eyes. What exactly do you want to say? Luna, when you confessed to me, I told you that I would try my best to like you. There was a hint of sarcasm in Henry's casual tone. Now, are you not satisfied? Are you seeking equal affection from me? The dry and cold wind blew past, and the blood on my face instantly faded. I couldn't help but shiver. He saw my reaction but still threw out the last sentence with an expressionless face. Luna, you'd better reflect on your overstepping behavior yourself. I stood frozen in the cold wind, looking at his back. My vision was gradually blurred by the accumulated tears. Right next to it is a football field. I don't know who kicked the ball. The ball just flew out through a large hole broken in the corner of the field. It directly hit my ankle. The force was so great that I immediately stumbled and fell to the ground. As if finally finding an outlet, I sat on the ground and sobbed. The player who ran out apologized to me, but I ignored him. But soon I stopped crying, wiped my tears, and left. I'm a college student now. I can't keep crying endlessly. Henry didn't send a single message. He not only didn't want to talk to me, but more importantly, he didn't have time. He was welcoming Serafina. Serafina was once my best friend. After knowing that I had a crush on Henry, she took the initiative to get to know him. Because of her cheerful and unconventional personality, Henry got along better with her. I watched the two of them get closer and closer. One day, I mentioned this matter to Serafina. Unexpectedly, her expression suddenly changed. She accused me of being and said that she and Henry were just like brothers. What led to our complete break was a sentence from her. Serafina looked at me with a smile in her eyes. She said, besides, you and Henry aren't together. Why should you care if I'm close to him or not? Later, for some reason, she went abroad before the college entrance examination. Now that she's back, the first person she contacts is Henry. I saw a video posted by a mutual friend of Serafina and Henry, who is also my classmate, on Moments. Under the dim spotlight, everyone was coaxing Henry and Serafina to have a toast. My hand holding the phone unconsciously tightened even more. Serafina walked towards Henry boldly and cheerfully. Everyone is like brothers. What's wrong with having a drink? Come on, classmate Henry. Are you scared of this? She turned this ambiguous posture into a way of pure friendship to welcome her back with a few light remarks. Henry twitched the corner of his mouth, got up and had a toast with her. There was silent warmth in his eyes when looking at her. I blinked, and tears fell down again in a useless way. I thought that maybe after all my efforts for so long, I still couldn't make Henry like me. Maybe we should break up. Let him go so that I won't be sad anymore. I took a deep breath, sniffed, and typed word by word to Henry. Let's break up. I didn't expect Henry to refuse to break up. After sending the message last night, I immediately turned off my phone and buried myself in the quilt and cried. Unknowingly, I fell asleep. When I woke up and turned on my phone, there was a missed call from Henry. Since there was only one call, I thought it was a wrong dial. I didn't call him back even when I went downstairs to attend class. Because my ankle was swollen from being kicked by the ball yesterday, I limped even when going downstairs. As soon as I walked out of the dormitory building, a familiar figure burst into my sight. Henry seemed to have been waiting for a long time. When he approached, I felt a cold air around him. Still angry? I lowered my head and didn't look at him. We've already broken up. I waited for you downstairs for 2 hours. There are still a bunch of things waiting for me in the laboratory. To come and find you, I will have to work nonstop for the next 2 days to make up for this time. He came over and took my hand. Don't be angry with me anymore, okay? I couldn't help but be a little moved. This was the first time Henry made a concession for me, but I still put the most crucial question in front of him. But if you don't like me, why are we still together? There was a soft laugh from above. What are you thinking? When did I say that? I murmured in my heart. Didn't you mean that yesterday? Henry, do you mean that you actually like me a little bit too, right? I looked into his eyes without flinching, but the morning fog was very thick, obscuring the emotions in his eyes. Yes. He answered after a few seconds of silence. Liar. Not long after, when I woke up from the hospital bed and recalled this sentence again, I finally recognized this lie and was completely disheartened. But at that time, I believed him. Because of his words, the grievance that had accumulated for a day dissipated. I put my hand in his palm and curved my lips. Okay, I'll trust you one more time. Henry noticed the swollen bump on my ankle. Without much hesitation, he carried me on his back and walked towards the teaching building. That was the most intimate act in the 2 years we were together. And it was also the last time. He put me down at the classroom door. It might snow later. Don't run after class. Wait for me to pick you up. I uttered an mm and waved at him. Go back quickly. Don't be late. Henry's mouth curved into a faint smile and he nodded and left. As he had said, not long after class started, snowflakes began to float outside the window. And they got bigger and bigger, and the snow on the ground quickly thickened. By the time class was over, it had already reached my ankles. Henry was very punctual in picking me up, but he seemed a bit absent-minded. I buckled my seatbelt and asked him, turning my head, "What's for lunch?" "You decide." I didn't mind his perfunctory response. After thinking for a while, I said, "There is a mountain villa in the suburbs. The Western restaurant there is built on the mountain and is especially suitable for enjoying the snow scenery. Shall we go there to eat?" Henry responded indifferently and started driving towards the suburbs. The snow was getting heavier and heavier. The farther away from the city center, the fewer people there were on the road. In the end, there were almost no cars on the highway. When we were almost there, Henry's phone suddenly rang. Then, he received the news that Serafina had an accident and left me in that snowstorm. I didn't make it to the mountain villa after all because I was taken to the hospital. When I woke up from the sickbed, I still had a high fever. My phone just rang and I pressed to turn it on. It was a video sent by Serafina. Obviously, judging from the angle, it was secretly recorded. Henry pressed Serafina into his arms and kissed her ear. He confessed sincerely and passionately, "I've been waiting for you. Except for you, I've never liked anyone else." Serafina seemed a bit aggrieved. She accused, "Did you get together with Luna just to be angry with me?" I quietly waited for his response. A few seconds later, his words of admission came clearly. I listened without any emotion. I should have thought of it earlier. Henry doesn't like me. The stabbing pain in my ankle brought back my thoughts. I opened my phone, sent Henry a message saying we should break up and then blocked him. I didn't expect Henry to lose his bottom line for Serafina. Another week passed. This week, I didn't see Henry and Serafina. The news that the two of them officially announced being together had spread like wildfire, but meeting them was inevitable. The three of us are all in the same club. Henry is the minister and almost the default next president. Both Serafina and I intend to run for minister. On Friday night, there is a club dinner to announce the time for running for minister and the preparations we need to make. Henry and Serafina were sitting right opposite me. Gradually, several male ministers got drunk and began to speak without thinking. One of them drunkenly glanced at my exposed arm. "Luna, your arm is so white?" I felt a bit uncomfortable hearing this sentence, but fearing that I was overthinking, I still nodded. Suddenly, he smiled and his tone was full of meaning. "Then isn't your whole body this white? Isn't it very easy to pinch marks?" As soon as he finished speaking, several boys present also laughed softly. Except for Henry. I don't know if it was my illusion, but he seemed to have a gloomy expression. Realizing what he meant, I frowned. Just as I was about to speak, a president spoke up first. "Luna, don't be angry. Everyone is just joking." Everyone looked at me. As if I got angry now, I would become the most inappropriate and least able to take a joke person. Before I could speak, that minister went even further and looked at Serafina. "Xiaoya, you are a dance major, right?" Serafina quietly moved closer to Henry. The minister hiccuped and laughed again. "I heard that dance majors know a lot of poses." Henry's expression changed instantly. He pushed his chair and stood up. Before everyone could react, he picked up the nearest wine bottle and directly smashed it on the male minister's head. "Do you need me to teach you how to speak?" The scene instantly turned into chaos. Some were pulling people apart and some were blaming. Only I stood there looking at Henry. I had known him for 9 years and had never seen him act so outrageously. He really likes Serafina. I subconsciously touched my chest, but there was no feeling. All my obsession and unwillingness towards Henry seemed to be buried in that heavy snow that day. The position of the main minister is almost predetermined. And for the remaining 2 vice minister positions, one of them is reportedly given to the girlfriend of a certain president. There is only one vice minister position left. Serafina and I are competing. That day, I was the first to speak. I flipped through the PPT and spoke without any hesitation. Henry under the stage, I completely ignored him. When I saw the approving gazes of the ministers and the president, I let out a sigh of relief. I hadn't laughed when Serafina spoke. She made a mistake. The PPT wasn't saved. Only a blank screen made her completely panicked, and her subsequent speech was also not satisfactory. I have to say that at this moment, I am a bit gloating. At the same time, I am almost certain that I will be elected. So, when I heard the news that I was defeated and Serafina was elected, I was completely stunned. "Why?" The vice president hemmed and hawed for a long time before vaguely mentioning. "Don't you think about who her boyfriend is?" "Henry. He is now the president and has absolute say." All the grievances erupted in this instant. I ran to Henry's laboratory. Coincidentally, he was the only one in the laboratory. I didn't hesitate to slap him. My hand accidentally hit the shelf next to it. I let out a soft hiss in pain. "Did you bump it?" Henry was frowning. When he heard my voice, he took a step forward directly and wanted to hold my hand. I dodged sharply. After a while, Henry spoke again. "Are you calmed down?" He was avoiding my eyes a bit. "Luna, if you're calmed down, quit the club." "Why?" I stared at him tightly, suppressing my grievance. "You doesn't want to be in the same club as you." After he said this sentence, I calmed down instead. "Henry, you have no right to order me." Luna. Henry, just like when we were together before, frowned impatiently and then was about to issue orders condescendingly again. I immediately interrupted. "Henry, remember, we have broken up. I don't like you anymore. Don't put on an arrogant look. I won't spoil you." After hearing this, the frown on Henry's face loosened instead. He raised his eyebrows and smiled. "Don't like me anymore?" He put his hands in his white coat and walked slowly towards me. He bent down and looked into my eyes. There was undisguised banter in his eyes. "Then who heard that I was with a you and still hid and cried?" I suddenly froze. My consciousness was neatly emptied, and I could only breathe by instinct. He saw it. On the night when I heard the news of his official announcement with Serafina, I sat in the corner of the playground and still couldn't hold back my tears. But it wasn't for Henry. It was to despise myself who had almost lost myself in the 2 years of being together. It was also regret, endless regret. Regret that the person I liked since I was young turned out to be a scumbag. A timely breeze blew away the thin clouds, and the sunlight shone in directly without obstruction. I was slowly pulled back to my thoughts by this warmth. I took a step back and distanced myself. Looking at this face that I had a crush on for many years, I could no longer find that throbbing feeling. Only disgust remained. Don't be too confident in yourself, Henry. What's so worthy about you, a scumbag, for me to cry for you? In the past, I didn't know people well and thought he was really trying to accept me. In fact, he just regarded me as a tool for him to be angry with Serafina and a springboard for reconciliation. Henry looked down at my eyes, trying to find a trace of me lying. In the end, probably without result, he turned around and returned to the laboratory bench. That's even better, he said. As for the club, if you don't quit on your own. If I don't quit on my own, what are you going to do? I smiled and took over his words. Henry, I tell you, I will not only not quit, but also win back the minister position that should belong to me. After throwing down these words, I left. Henry is the president. I know it's very difficult for me to achieve this, but if I don't resist, there really is no hope at all. On the way back, I stopped by the counselor's office. For an excuse, I said that I lost my phone in the office on the day of the election. I was allowed to go to the monitoring room to adjust the monitoring. I successfully recorded Serafina's stuttering and terrible speech. But this can't prove that Henry gave Serafina special treatment. They have every reason to say that Serafina's usual performance is much higher than mine. After being at a loss for 2 days and still having no idea, a friend from the same club just reminded me. Luna, the minister who spoke rudely last time has been out of the hospital for several days. Tonight, as the vice president, he will attend the meeting. Stay away from him. I paused for a moment, then thanked her as if nothing had happened. The atmosphere of the meeting that night was very stiff. Whenever Henry said something, he would be contradicted by the vice president. Serafina, who was complacent about becoming the minister, and Henry, the president, didn't show any joy on their faces. According to the theorem, when the smile on a person's face disappears, it will be transferred to another person's face. Like me. After the meeting, I found my cooperation partner. Even though he is not a good person. When the general meeting of the club was held, I volunteered to be the host. As soon as I came out after changing into my dress in the backstage, I was stopped by Henry. Luna. His tone implied a warning. Don't do unnecessary things. What are you referring to? I looked back at him calmly without any flaw. Henry stared at me for 2 seconds before letting me leave. When I was getting familiar with the process, the male host suddenly brought up another topic. Classmate, let's take a photo together. I nodded. He raised his hand to put his arm around me, but this dress of mine is off the shoulder, and my shoulder is completely exposed. I was about to avoid it when the male host's hand was slapped away. Henry came over again at some point. Standing beside me with a face, he slapped away the male host's hand that was about to put around me. Senior pay. The male host opened his mouth awkwardly. Can't you take a photo without putting your hand on? He shook his head dryly. Found an excuse and left without taking the photo. Henry turned his gaze to me again. He wrapped his coat around me without saying a word. I immediately frowned and dodged. Are you sick? In order to prevent that kind of situation from happening again, you'd better put it on. Once again, he put it on me irresistibly. Impatiently, I pulled off the coat and threw it on the ground. Does Serafina know you're doing this? Henry's expression didn't change. Why mention her? I didn't expect him to be so shameless. I was so angry that I laughed. Please stay away from me. Now if you touch me, I feel extremely disgusted. After saying that, I wanted to leave. But as soon as I turned around, he grabbed me. Henry pushed me hard against the door, held my chin, and his eyes were filled with anger. Luna, what are you being stubborn about? Get lost. I struggled to break free. Henry, let me go. Henry sneered. What are you doing? A sudden exclamation came from nearby. Serafina walked in. I took advantage of this gap to break free. Luna, is someone else's boyfriend more charming? Are you so shameless that you still chase after him? Looking at her righteous appearance, I laughed absurdly. I return this sentence to you. Having known Serafina for so many years, I naturally know the things she least wants to mention. How lacking in love are you that you would chase after someone else's boyfriend, Serafina? Just like when you were a child. I watched as her face turned paler and paler, and a sense of pleasure spread through my heart. I continued unhurriedly, because your parents went to work in other places and you lacked love and cared about face since childhood, you secretly took pictures of my mom and lied that it was your mom. After the matter was exposed, Serafina cried and apologized to me, saying that she was just afraid that others would look down on her because she was a left-behind child. After hearing this, I didn't think much and completely believed her words. Now thinking about it, a large part of the reason she chose my mom was that my mom was driving a BMW at that time. It was just because of her vanity. I exposed the whole story in public. Serafina was guilty and broken. She quickly walked over and raised her hand towards my face. Luna. I stopped it in midair and firmly held her wrist. Serafina, it's time for you to pay a price for your unscrupulous means. Enough. Henry walked over and pulled my hand away. Serafina collapsed into his arms and began to cry quietly. Henry held her and comforted her softly, looking at me reproachfully. The conference began. All procedures proceeded in an orderly and steady manner until right before Henry was about to give a speech. I didn't give him this chance to take the stage. I projected the pre-prepared video onto the big screen. There were club teachers and everyone in the club sitting in the audience. Henry and Serafina sitting in the front row instantly changed their expressions. Dear teachers and classmates, let's review the situation when Serafina ran for minister again. I smiled into the microphone. Then, I pressed the mouse and played the video. I was sure that the two of them didn't dare to stand up and stop me on the spot. If they jumped out now, it would be confirmed that Serafina got in through the back door. After the video was played, Serafina's face had become extremely ugly. But things were far from over. I casually glanced at the people in the audience. They had different expressions. I smiled and released another recording. No, obviously Luna is more outstanding. Why did you all vote for his girlfriend following Henry? What do you know? As an exchange condition, Henry gave us full control over sponsorship. Yes, who can refuse this? In the club, sponsorship has always been managed by the president. Everyone knows the benefits here. The three people in the conversation are the vice president who was beaten into the hospital by Henry because of his dirty words, and the other two vice presidents who voted for Serafina as minister. This recording was sent to me by the president after he tricked them into talking and recorded it. Because he also held a grudge against Henry and didn't want to see him have an easy time. Everything went very smoothly that day. Probably because it was too smooth, I overlooked Serafina's extremely malicious gaze from the audience. At the same time, I also forgot her nature. She is always vengeful. The reputation of getting in through the back door is confirmed. Coupled with Serafina's various behaviors such as being absent from meetings, being late, and hardly participating in club activities, it is inevitable that she will be removed from her position. I naturally took over the vacant position of minister. But I didn't get the understanding of others. On the day of the regular meeting, Henry and Serafina were both absent. The vice president announced that I would take over. As soon as the words fell, the room was silent. Then there were dense murmurs. I just don't understand. Did she have to say it in front of so many people? Yes, this makes our club so embarrassing. She must be crazy about becoming the minister. The two vice presidents who didn't get the sponsorship also had opinions about me because of this matter. They remained silent and let others talk. The world is always like this. Only the officials are allowed to set fires, while the common people are not allowed to light lamps. Henry can give his ignorant girlfriend special treatment through back channels, but I can't expose it. One never knows the pain until it happens to oneself. I fight for myself, yet it has become a wrong thing that makes everyone complain. They never thought that this matter cannot be solved privately. If I take the evidence and go to complain to the club teacher, because the teacher favors Henry, it is very likely that the result will be that the teacher casually gives me some consolation prize and asks me to downplay the matter. Then neither Henry nor Serafina will get the due retribution. Announcing it in public is my only way. I have a few words to say. I slowly opened my mouth, intending to defend myself. But I was impatiently interrupted by a person in the seat. All right, can you stop talking? Minister Luna is awesome. In order to become a minister, she accuses Chairman Pei and sacrifices the reputation of the whole club. She really stops at nothing. And you? Suddenly a male voice came from outside the door. I looked in the direction of the sound. It was Ryan. He is the president of the student union, the largest club in the school. He is usually very carefree and doesn't really take care of practical matters. I'm not very familiar with him. I just worked with him a few times when I was occasionally transferred to help at the student union. Senior Ryan, the person who spoke, immediately stood up, and his imposing manner weakened. Ryan was wearing a black baseball cap. The shadow cast by it covered the light in his eyes, making them appear extremely dark. He leaned against the door and raised his chin at that person. Tell me how noble you are. That person remained silent. Ryan was holding a stack of documents in one hand and had the other hand in his pocket. He walked over casually and stood in front of that person. Let me think of how to describe you. He dusted off that stack of documents and then pressed it on that person. Stopping at nothing for a scholarship? That person's face visibly paled. His eyes were full of panic, as if he couldn't believe how Ryan knew about this matter. Suppressing classmates and threatening the other party to give up the scholarship. You don't need to attend this meeting anymore. Just go to the department directly. The slap in the face came so quickly. I didn't show it on my face, but deep down I couldn't help feeling secretly pleased. I almost had no communication with Ryan. Just when he passed by me, he murmured, "Excuse me." As we passed by each other, the faint smell of smoke on him came faintly. Serafina's disappearance for 2 days was entirely to prepare for taking revenge on me. The physical education class assessment is approaching. That evening, after I finished bouncing the volleyball, my hands were extremely sore. Holding the volleyball and walking towards the equipment room, I saw a man standing in front of the equipment room from a distance. He was dressed like a physical education teacher, but he was wearing a hat and a mask. From time to time, his hand would lower the brim of his hat. The sports equipment room for volleyball is located in a remote place and there are almost no people. I paused for a moment and still turned around and left first. On the way back, I was constantly thinking about that strangely dressed person. Without noticing, I directly bumped into the shoulder of the person in front. It was Ryan. He was wearing a black and blue headband on his forehead and was dressed in black football clothes. Senior Ryan, sorry. I nodded and apologized. He glanced at the volleyball in my hand. Did you choose volleyball for physical education class? I nodded. Then, Ryan glanced at my arm and frowned slightly. Just as he was about to speak, a scream came from not far away. It was from the volleyball equipment room. Ryan threw out a sentence, "You go back to the dormitory first. If your arm is swollen, remember to apply medicine." Then he immediately ran over. Thinking of the man just now, I still chose to follow. My intuition told me that this matter might be related to me. I followed Ryan and trotted to the equipment room. Through the window, I saw Serafina, who was screaming, and the man who was hugging her. As soon as I caught a glimpse, a pair of hands covered my eyes. Ryan's gloomy voice came from behind. "Put on your clothes and come and open the door." I slowly turned around and moved my gaze away, also moving away from Ryan's hand. Senior Ryan. He paused for a moment and lowered his hand without speaking again. 23. My intuition was right. All of this was designed by Serafina. That man was afraid that we would call the police. In that case, he would mostly be charged with attempted rape. So, he blurted out the whole story. Serafina traded with him online. The two had never met each other. Today's act was to forcibly take a few private pictures of me. She didn't ask this man to do anything else, just to scare me. Then, he pulled out a photo from his phone and said it was sent to him by Serafina. It was a photo of me being secretly taken while bouncing the volleyball. The angle was not clear, and since it wasn't a full-face photo, he mistook the person. But in the end, it was Serafina who reaped what she sowed. Without guessing, it was mostly because she thought I had fallen into the trap and couldn't resist coming to take a look. Unexpectedly, she almost got herself trapped here. Ryan narrowed his eyes and took a quick look at the two of them. Suddenly, he kicked directly at the man's chest. He sneered, full of coldness. "Looking for death, aren't you?" Serafina was greatly frightened by Ryan and immediately called Henry. As the sky gradually darkened, the temperature dropped a lot. Ryan happened to stand diagonally in front of me, blocking a lot of wind. On the contrary, Serafina had already stood very far inside, but because her clothes were torn in several places, she was still shivering with cold. Henry arrived very quickly. He glanced at everyone and finally his gaze fell on me. Henry walked straight up to me and pressed his lips tightly together. "Why are you wearing so little?" Saying that, he took off his coat and was about to put it on me. "Friend, have you got the wrong person?" Ryan, standing diagonally in front of me, raised his hand to block Henry and smiled rather provocatively. "Your girlfriend is over there." He nodded his chin towards Serafina beside him. Henry was stunned for a moment. He looked at me for 2 seconds, his eyes complex. "Henry." It was not until Serafina called him that he went over with his coat and silently put it on her. "Can I beg you not to call the police?" "Senior, please." Serafina's voice was tinged with a sob. It seemed that she was really scared. Ryan leaned lazily against the door, playing with a lighter in his hand, not even looking up. "You shouldn't ask me." Serafina paused and instantly looked at me. "I'm sorry, Luna. I was wrong. Please don't call the police. I just did this because I was angry and irrational for being removed from my position. I really won't do it again in the future." I saw her force out 2 tears. Smiling, yet telling her in an unquestionable tone, "No way." Serafina's expression instantly changed. "Luna, you guessed there was a problem with the equipment room long ago, right? Was this all on purpose by you?" She looked at the man she hired, then at me, her gaze shifting back and forth. She drew out a long O and said, "Could it be that Luna bribed you again? Then you pretended to mistake me for someone else, pulled up my clothes, and wanted to take pictures of me, right?" "Henry," Serafina became aggrieved again and coquettishly in public. "They treat me like this. Don't you care?" The anger I had suppressed for several hours erupted in an instant. I walked over, pulled Serafina around, raised my hand and slapped her. "Just because you don't have a mother, you think the whole world is an orphan, right? You." She glared and was about to hit back when Henry raised his hand to stop her. At the same time, Ryan behind me spoke slowly. "If you slap her, I guarantee that your remaining days in this school will not be easy." Serafina gritted her teeth and finally put down her hand. "There is a 360-degree camera right in front of the equipment room door." I took out my phone. "You can guess as much as you want and tell the police your thoughts." Then, I called the police in front of her. I finished taking the statement with Ryan and went back to school on the same road. Passing by a pharmacy on the way, he went in and bought a can of spray. "Volleyball will hurt for a few days for people who practice it for the first time. This can relieve it." He handed me the bag, Senior Ryan. I hesitated and took it, then said, "How much is it?" "I'll transfer the money to you." Ryan clicked his tongue softly, seeming rather impatient. I thought he was going to refuse, but suddenly he was silent. After half a minute, he spoke. "Okay." Ryan pressed to light up his phone and brought up the QR code of his WeChat business card. I pursed my lips and still scanned it to add him and transferred the money. When we were almost downstairs of my dormitory, Ryan stopped. After a brief farewell, I turned and walked towards my dormitory. "Luna." This was the first time Ryan called me by my name. This kind of thing won't happen again in the future. I didn't turn around and just listened as the footsteps behind me grew farther and farther. The Ryan I know won't buy medicine for girls, nor will he walk girls back to their dormitories. Henry walked in front of me from behind, his expression unreadable. Luna, what's your relationship? Obviously, he had followed us all the way. That has nothing to do with you. After a tiring day today, I was too emotionally exhausted. I didn't want to deal with him anymore. After casually giving a perfunctory reply, I wanted to leave. Henry wanted to pull my wrist again, but I blocked it with my bag. Don't come and be cheap with me, okay? I rubbed my temples. Henry lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, I didn't know about everything Serafina did today. So, what are you trying to say? I watched him with interest. Henry self-deprecatingly pulled the corner of his mouth. It's strange, Luna. I always thought I didn't love you. But why do all my habits remember you? In the crowd, I will always look for you first. When I see that you are wearing thin clothes, I subconsciously want to put a coat on you. If I, who once deeply loved Henry, heard these words, I would probably be so happy that I couldn't sleep. Thinking that Henry was moved by me and finally completely fell in love with me. However, now I clearly feel that except for calmness and a hint of absurdity, there is no other emotion. Just like you said, it's a habit. Is it? Henry stared at me without blinking. Then why am I extremely irritable when I see other men putting their arms around your shoulders? Why don't I want to see you get too close to Ryan? I really don't want to at all. Luna, he is too special to you. There was a hint of scrutiny in his eyes. Are you two really nothing? I suddenly chuckled. Henry, are you now interrogating me in the capacity of Serafina's boyfriend? Just now, when I learned the whole story and its causes and consequences, I broke up with her at the police station. I originally thought she was just a little spoiled. I didn't expect her to go this far. I remembered the video of Henry confessing to her that Serafina sent me and raised my eyebrow mockingly. I thought your love for her was so deep. Henry is this kind of person. Seemingly very affectionate, but actually the most selfish. He only loves himself. I kept saying that I had loved Serafina for many years, but still broke up easily. Henry approached, his Adam's apple rolled, and his voice was a bit hoarse. It seems wrong, Luna. It seems that I have always loved only one person, but I didn't recognize it when she loved me. Now I hope she can give me another chance. It's so disgusting. How could he say this so shamelessly? This was my first reaction. Get out. I couldn't hold back my anger. Have you forgotten what you said and did to me before? How can you have the nerve to say that? Do you want me to repeat it to you again? In a snowstorm, you left me in a deserted suburb. You clearly knew that my leg was injured, but you still went to find Serafina without hesitation and let me fend for myself. I didn't mention all the little grievances in the past. I just told him word by word, Henry, I almost died in that snowstorm. With every word I said, Henry's face turned paler. His eyes were red and he repeated in a hoarse voice over and over again, Luna, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I really didn't expect it to be so serious. No, you could have thought of it. I exposed him calmly. You just didn't want to spare any thought to it because you were only thinking about Serafina at that time. Henry looked at me helplessly. He seemed to want to defend himself, but still said nothing after opening his mouth. So, Henry, don't come to me again. What you owe me can't be repaid at all. After I returned to the dormitory, Henry was still standing there. Seeing his painful and regretful look, I didn't feel any pleasure. As if the suffocating near-death feeling of being hurt and heartbroken in the past had become very distant. After washing up, I received a message from a club classmate. Luna. Henry voluntarily withdrew from the club. Originally, the club teacher had punished him leniently for his serious offense. Unexpectedly, he withdrew from the club himself. After reading it, I just sneered coldly. He is just trying his best to make up for what he owed me. But what's the use? For me, these are just insignificant things. Everything Henry did is ultimately just self-moving. Seraphina's situation was not serious and she was released soon. But rumors about her began to spread everywhere. It was rumored that her private photos had been taken, and some people had begun to spread those photos privately. I was pulled to see at once. As a person involved, I clearly know that these photos are fake. But I have no obligation to help her clarify. Not following the rumors is completely restrained by my moral bottom line. Finally, unable to bear the pressure, she applied for withdrawal from school. Although she is unscrupulous, she really loves Henry. On the way to the teaching building that day, I saw Seraphina standing downstairs Henry's building with a mask and dragging a suitcase, making a phone call. Although the distance was not close, I could vaguely hear a few words. "Henry, I'm leaving soon. Are you still unwilling to come out and see me? I really just want to see you." After that, I don't know what was said on the other end of the phone. Suddenly, she broke down emotionally and squatted on the ground and cried. I indifferently withdrew my gaze and continued on my way. Henry is essentially a bit extreme. When he loved Seraphina, he hurt me unscrupulously for her. When he didn't love her and regretted it, he didn't even want to see Seraphina. A long time later, I recalled that perhaps the accident that everyone sighed about later was deliberately caused by Henry. I even reflected on myself for it. Was I the cause of the accident? But soon I realized clearly that in the final analysis, it was still the paranoia revealed in Henry's bones. Henry's words that night still made me have some grudges against Ryan. Whether he had that intention or not, I still intentionally kept a distance from him. Ryan was not overly enthusiastic either, and our interactions became fewer and fewer. Until the club gathering, it happened that the student union was also having a team building activity in the next box. Finally, Ryan changed to a larger box and the two groups got together. Some people booed and toasted the chairman and president. I have a slight alcohol allergy, but everyone in front toasted. When the wine bottle stopped in front of me, I pursed my lips and reached out to take it, but the wine bottle was taken away. A shadow fell overhead. I looked up and saw Ryan standing next to me, his hand on the turntable. He glanced down at me and said, "Those with alcohol allergy don't need to drink." After saying that, he left with the wine bottle without waiting for me to reply. Wow, Senior Ryan is so good to you. He still remembers that you are allergic to alcohol, Luna. Huh? I withdrew my gaze and turned to the friend next to me. She is from the student union and is under Ryan. She chattered on. Well, like before the last meeting, someone was nagging again about how you shouldn't have exposed Seraphina at the general meeting last time. Senior Ryan directly scolded her in front of so many people and removed her from the excellent evaluation. Although her excellent evaluation quota was originally obtained through backdoor, no wonder she sympathizes with Seraphina. I listened to her in a daze. She continued, and also, I overheard him talking to your chairman last time. He was clearly protecting you and warning them not to give you a hard time. I opened my mouth but couldn't say a word. I felt ashamed for deliberately avoiding him and being cold before. Because of these words, I remembered that Henry had been pestering me some time ago. Whether in class or after class, I could always see him. He is playing self-moving tricks, but he doesn't want to know that I don't care about him anymore. The only hope is that he can stop disturbing me. That day under the teaching building, I was really annoyed by him. Inevitably, my voice was a little louder. Henry, can you get out of here? I really don't want to see you. Don't make me hate you even more, okay? Henry's eyes were a little dim. Still, he insisted on handing me the bag in his hand and said in a low voice, "You have a bad stomach. At least have breakfast." I looked at him for 2 seconds. Sure enough, he couldn't listen to me. I directly opened his hand and left without saying a word. At that time, it seemed that Ryan had just finished class and was not far away in my peripheral vision. After that day, Henry only came to me once more. After saying an inexplicable sentence, he left and never appeared again. Now thinking about it, it's probably Ryan who quietly helped me out. After struggling for several days, I still decided to invite Ryan to have a meal to express my gratitude. When I was editing the invitation message, a pop-up window showed a new message. Click it. Luna, have you heard? Henry seems to be dead. I subconsciously sent a question mark. Suddenly, I found this sentence very difficult to understand. I heard that he was frozen to death in the mountains. Didn't there be a heavy snowstorm due to the cold spell in late spring a few days ago? He actually went to climb mountains in the suburbs. It's really quite strange. He drove there, but it is said that according to the monitoring, he parked his car on the side of the road and walked several kilometers on foot. It seems to be 3 kilometers. Moreover, the car is not broken. I froze instantly and fell back onto the chair with weak legs. The messages from there still kept coming. You said what was he thinking? He didn't climb early or late. He had to run up the mountain in heavy snow. Not to mention there is no signal, he can't even get out. She changed the subject. In fact, it's also very tragic. It is said that according to the footprints left on the mountain, he has been trying to find a way out, but he couldn't get out and was frozen to death alive. At this moment, I suddenly thought of the last time I met Henry inappropriately. He just said a strange sentence to me. Luna, what I owe you will be fully compensated and repaid. His expression softened. When I come back, can you give me another chance? At that time, I didn't think deeply about his words. I ignored him and left directly by bypassing him. That was also the first time that he didn't follow me but stood in place and seemed to look at me for a long time. This news had a great impact on me. All signs indicate that Henry is really atoning in his own way. The grievances I have suffered before, he also endured them all. But in fact, I want to tell him that even if he comes out of the mountains and comes back alive, I will not be with him again. I really don't love him anymore. But Henry didn't give me the chance to say this. The invitation edited in the dialogue box with Ryan was still not sent out in the end. Too many things have happened in one semester. Whether it is emotionally or psychologically, I need a buffer period. I submitted a leave application to the counselor. Give myself a month to adjust and sort out my mood. I took a taxi and left at the school gate with my suitcase. When passing by a certain place, I called for the driver to stop. I pressed down the car window and looked sideways. 2 months ago, I was driven out of the car by Henry and squatted beside this bright pillar for a long time before waiting for rescue. He left resolutely, and I couldn't see his car soon. Many times, he left me in place and left by himself. And I will always be the one looking at his back. Until his back completely disappeared from sight, he never looked back once. Not once. Press up the car window. The driver restarts and steps on the gas to leave. I left all my emotions for Henry, whether it was resentment or the only trace of annoyance left in the later stage, in place. Before boarding the plane, I received a call from Ryan. There was silence for a long time. He only said, "After you come back from leave, I will invite you to dinner." Remembering the favor I owed, I said, "I should invite you." A light laugh came through the current. "Okay, it's a deal." I also curved my lips and smiled. "It's a deal." Extra, Ryan chapter today, the presidents and ministers of various clubs are having a meeting. Don't forget, brother why? The roommate reminded. Ryan clicked his tongue softly. Why are there so many things? He put aside the keyboard and only took his mobile phone and left. When he arrived downstairs the conference room, he met a little girl asking for directions. Originally, he was in a bad mood because of various things. When he looked up, he showed some impatient expressions. Luna saw that he seemed very annoyed by being disturbed by her. She was embarrassed and paused, not knowing whether she should speak. "What?" Ryan urged. Luna made her attitude more polite and then asked, "Excuse me, is the ministers' meeting today in this building?" Ryan nodded. "Okay, thank you." Luna hurriedly thanked. Ryan took 2 steps and then looked back at her. "Aren't you going up?" "No, no." Luna waved her hand and said with a smile, "I'm waiting for someone here." Ryan didn't say anything else. After the meeting, Ryan knew who she was waiting for. That boy named Henry. He walked behind the two of them and saw the little girl who had just smiled very restrainedly at him smile brightly, revealing the dimple on the right side. Her eyes were shining with tiny lights as she looked at that boy with unconcealed love. He only took 2 glances and then withdrew his gaze and walked around them even faster. Ryan only felt even more annoyed today. Later, he encountered them several times on the road, but Luna didn't notice. At that time, there was only Henry in her eyes. Ryan looked back at her back and sneered. Is it necessary? She doesn't even look at the road when walking. Although he and Luna have worked together several times, they have almost no communication. Even if he does have some different thoughts about her, he has never shown them. She has a boyfriend and she loves her boyfriend very much. But her boyfriend doesn't seem to be very good to her. That day he saw with his own eyes Henry leave her where she was. He leaned against the football goal and watched quietly. The girl who had been standing quietly was hit by a ball kicked by someone unknown and immediately burst into tears. In the end, he still didn't go forward. It was rather inappropriate without a certain status. He just watched her for as long as she cried. The next time he saw her was a week later. She seemed to have changed into a different person. He had also heard the news that Henry was with someone else. Ryan's first reaction was that she must be very sad. After all, she likes him so much. At the same time, a glimmer of joy from a sense of relief rose in him. But soon, it disappeared completely. Luna was deliberately avoiding him. Although they had broken up, she wouldn't accept others so quickly. Ryan had been proud for more than 20 years, but he was extremely humble in this matter. As soon as Luna felt a little unwell, he immediately retreated behind that safety line and hid his thoughts. But because Luna had made an appointment with him for a meal a month later, Ryan became concerned again. Therefore, when a girl confessed to him later, he had a unified reason. Sorry, I'm waiting for someone. He thought that since it was Luna, it didn't matter to wait a little longer, 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 wait a little